Welcome to this episode of Sea Trade in Maritime in Conversation podcast. My name is Emma Howe, Content Director at Sea Trade Maritime. Today I have the pleasure to be in conversation with Mikael Karlsson, Head of Business Development, Northern Marine Group Limited, who's here to talk to us about IMPA SAVE, a movement to bring sustainable solutions to the maritime procurement sector. In the last quarter of 2024, Sea Trade Maritime joined the IMPA SAVE initiative and now works closely with the team to raise awareness of its solutions for a more sustainable future. So let me welcome you today, Mikael.
Thank you, Emma. I'm pleased to be here.
So let's go straight into some questions. IMPA SAVE was started in 2020, and as we head towards its fifth anniversary, tell us about IMPA SAVE, what it is and its objectives, please, Mikael.
Yeah, it's about where to start with this. I'll take a step back, if I may, because when I began this, I didn't begin it on my own. There was a conversation between like-minded people from our industry that I spoke to in the process of starting this. And honestly, I thought we could do an initiative every 3 months because I thought it was such a good initiative. So I said, we got done with this in 3 months. This is so great. So I was at that time talking about traceable seafood, different ways of cleaning on board ships. We could do your own cleaning material on the ships. Many different ways of where you could save cost on. You could save wastage, such as plastic bottles for cleaning chemicals or the likes of water, which we're discussing here today. This is where it all started, but I quickly learned that this is not that easy, no matter how good the evidence is. And then I'd say that we have built a vision and a mission, but it's kind of been built as we had more and more pledges coming on board and more questions in the process coming on. We actually did mission where we wanted to support the call for the UN sustainability goals, and then use our network to bring knowledge of available sustainable solution in the marine and offshore industry.
So if we go back to the beginning, I believe the first goal of the programme was to encourage ship owners, managers and maritime suppliers globally to choose suitable planet-friendlier alternatives to the vast quantities of plastic bottles that are currently delivered to the global fleet. Now, when I was looking or researching our conversation, I understood that the number of pledges is now over 100 companies. But how many ships does that represent and the percentage of the global fleet? And actually, where would you like that to end in 25?
And this is where I don't get my hands over my head. I early on learned that if you just get 1%, it's a win. You're moving the needle. And luckily we are above the 1%. But to answer your question, we are sitting at 7% of the global fleet when we're looking at the commercially trading ships, which we have put a number on, which is 56,000 ships. We've got about 8,500 ships that has onboarded our solution from the various solutions to purify the water on board their ships. And it does represent a number between 102 million bottles to 152 million bottles. And it depends on how you do your math. When we started out this, we had a very large caterer on board helping us with some numbers because we had no idea of the amount of water being purchased and brought on board a ship. We got a number that was staggering, 18,000 tons. And you cannot quantify that in 18,000 bottles, because if they come in a pint or half liter or 1.5 liter. So we put a number that was 12,000 just to go on the low side. And that number resonates with the 102 million bottles that we have saved on a year. To answer your question, I would like to see 100. I think every owner, every company that has any procurement purchasing going on board a ship should be looking at this. Part of me think if you're in the procurement, it's your job to do this, because you should be looking at what you're buying, sourcing, and what you don't need to buy and don't need to source. And in many of the cases, we've had so many conversations ongoing and people say, we can't do this on board, our crew don't want to do it. But it's not just about crew. It's about the environment. It's about good solutions. And some experts would even argue that the water you produce on board with these machines you're putting on board to purify the water are even cleaner than the stuff you buy in a plastic water bottle. Now, I'm no scientist, but there's so much evidence out there that when you are putting drinking water in a plastic container, there are other things inside of that plastic bottle. And I've been on the ship supply side. I've seen pallets of water standing in the sun, waiting to go on board in some very warm countries. Does it release any plastic into the water properly? Do we wash it through our bodies? Yes, but I don't know. So there are some things and some concerns about what we're really drinking when we're drinking the water. Besides a health concern, it's just the environment. Why are we're sailing on water? Why are we buying water on bottles? I don't get it.
Well, like you say, there is a solution, and through IMPA SAVE, you actually provide a directory, don't you, of options where purchasers, procurement professionals can go to and look at those alternatives that are widely available. Can you tell us a little bit about that as well?
Yeah, I can. So when we began this, we looked at a few solutions, and I probably said this to people listening to this before, but I had no idea in the beginning how to do this. So I actually got in contact with NASA in Houston, the guys who send us into space, and asked them, what do? Do you bring water on board? Interesting conversation was up until 2008, they actually did. And I can't fathom that you bring a paddle of water on board a space shuttle and you fly it into space to end on a space station. So we knew there was some solution, but obviously when you're talking NASA and space, you're thinking, okay, it's going to cost a gazillion. But we had two companies coming forward very early on and said we had solutions, and it was fairly inexpensive. And we looked at the cost of bottles, which at that time we were sitting between $5,000 to $6,000. That was an estimate we did, depending on where you trade in the world. And these units could cost between $2,000 up to $5,000. We even got later on $7,000. But then you look at return on investment, it comes very fast. And then we learned there's also cost of waste, which is another part we hadn't considered. Actually, what do you do with the waste? Why do we need the waste? Because the concern was that we want the bottle out of the whole ecosystem because they blow in the water and the oceans and pollutes there. But I learned along the way that with these solutions, you remove a lot. And I think we got over 20 solutions on the directory now. And these solutions have come forward, and there's been many more that's come forward. But one of the rules we made early on was that they had to have a testimonial from a renowned owner manager that would actually stand behind the solution. That's how we done the quality check. And then you can argue that's not enough. Maybe not, but it's actually a pathway into a solution. And then it is up to the managers and the owners out there to choose what solution provides them, and then they do the quality check. So we're not just giving a free spot on the directory for anyone that says they can do this from let's say they build it in a garage. Not that that's anything bad, but there's somebody out there who's been using that solution that we believe is a legit, strong company with a healthy way of running their company. So we assume that if they onboard a solution, that they've done the research. So we, as a group, I'm not standing and saying that solution or this solution is better than that. That's really up to each owner, manager, caterer out there that choose to go for this.
And actually, to give our listeners a sense of perspective and enabling them to visualize the extent of this problem, what we're saying is that the plastic bottles that currently exist on ships globally are able to build a bridge 5 feet wide reaching to the moon. And I'm assuming since that statement was made, that's even further now. So, I mean, that's just a phenomenal thing to visualize, isn't it?
Yeah, I mean, it was one of the things I did in the beginning. I did a lot of calculations because it is about visualizing what this really is. I was trying to think if you try to put it in a landfill, I mean, how much of Singapore, the country of Singapore, could you cover? And it was quite a lot, actually, if you just look at the annual consumption. And the bridge to the moon was actually, I measured the width and the length of the bottle and just tried to tally up what would that look like. So yeah, you can walk safely on a bridge to the moon if you build out the consumption of these water bottles, which equates to 1 billion bottles annually spent on the 56,000. And I will say, amongst the 56,000, I haven't counted the ferry or cruise sector or the oil and gas business here for the vessel. So it's a lot. It's far more bottles. And then someone would say, but it's a drop in the ocean if you compare to the actual consumption worldwide onshore. But that really doesn't matter. It's about doing something. It's about doing something good here. And I think that's also my message when I speak to people about this.
You've spoken so far about the purchasers, those that can make that decision. But I'm guessing suppliers need to do their bits. And whilst you've mentioned, obviously, there's 20 plus companies on the directory that have looked at solutions, do you think enough is being done by suppliers?
I actually think suppliers have done a fantastic job enabling solutions. I mean, you got some suppliers who've gotten into the business of selling water purifiers on board ships because they are suppliers, some are ship chandlers that are adding something extra to the portfolio. But one of the things we uncovered early on was the availability of another source of water. And here people are talking about a safety stock on board should something break down or something else could happen on board that makes that the solution can't provide the water. You could argue some has put two solutions on board. So if one breaks, they still have another. God forbid that two breaks down, but it could also happen. So they bought a safety stock. And one of the things we did was we then mentioned the better choice would be carton. With that said, and this is pest or cholera for some, because we were actually challenged early on the solution and the emissions of plastic bottled water and carton. And I was actually surprised to see how close they were. But the argument was the carton was slightly better than the plastic bottled water, but it's far more expensive, which is another challenge. So since we don't have a high demand for water on cartons, the price probably is also a bit higher because it is easier and today cheaper to produce the plastic containers, so to speak. I think if we had more demand on the cartons and it would be purchased in larger quantities, it would probably drive that price further down. But that's just not the case. And I think I've spoken to a lot of suppliers who's actually joined IMPA SAVE as a solutions provider by having cartons anywhere from available in Singapore, Australia, South America, South Africa, or Africa continent. A few of the owners and managers and caterers are actually sourcing these bottles. And I will not mention any names, but I mean, we got one tanker owner. They're only buying carton right now. So they actually put themselves right into this, and they don't even have they do have a safety stock on board, but it's also carton. So they try to do the right thing in the sourcing. So I think suppliers has come forward, but I've had conversation with them where they got this stock of water and they got these owners coming in, but they're still buying plastic bottled water. So there has been conversation whether we should just all agree that we will not deliver in any more plastic bottled water anymore. That might be utopia, but there was a conversation about that. What if everybody just said, nope, we're not going to deliver, we're not going to source plastic bottled water anymore. You can only buy carton from us if you want to buy water, or maybe aluminium cans for that sake. But we are not there, and I don't think we should have to force companies to not buy. I think it should be a choice, a conscious choice when it comes down to it. And that is what I'm still looking for. And it kind of goes back to the question, how many companies has pledged to this and how many ships on board? 8,500 ships, and we started from zero. It's 7% of the 56,000 ships. So I argue, where are all the others, if I may say so? So it's I want this to be a choice, not a force. But unfortunately, what I'm understanding is maybe it has to be regulated by the government, so they perhaps needs to outlaw the use of plastic bottles on board the ships. And I also will add this, and this is also on the journey. When you're talking technically, there's something called MARPOL Annex 5, and inside of that there is actually in writing it says you're supposed to reduce your waste on board, and plastic bottles is a lot of waste. It's not easy to break down a package, and some would even shred it. But if you shred it, then you got all the fibers from the plastic, all of the dust all over the place, which indirectly will be microfibers. You don't want to do that either. So it's hard.
Do you think this is a geographical challenge as much as anything? Do you see that of those ships that now participate, more are in the more westernized parts of the globe, or is this something that universally is a problem?
I think universally it's a problem. I mean, we got pledges from all over the world. I mean, there are Western, I would say they are European owners not participating in this. But there are also Chinese owners and owners in Singapore who's participating, but also not participating. So I think I'm still trying to wrap my head around why this is so challenging for these people to come on, and why I also appreciate having this interview, because what I realized is the outreach. I mean, we had one pledger from Canada who joined because their competitor in Canada joined. They didn't even know IMPA SAVE or IMPA existed at the time. So it is various channels that brings the knowledge of IMPA SAVE out to the world and to the owners. I will, however, say, I mean, we are getting a bigger outreach. We are getting more support. I mean, I participated at Crew Connect, not last year, but the year before that, where I introduced IMPA SAVE, where, by the way, we also took home the I think the sustainability award for that particular year for the IMPA SAVE, and that, me being on stage, and what followed was a lot of good conversation with companies who was saying, I didn't see my company up there. Why are we not on board? I said, well, I've been talking to your purchasing department, but there's been no headway on that. They just looked at it, but nothing happened. So he invited me down to see them, and we had a dinner in Copenhagen, I can tell you, and they still haven't pledged, but they are considering still. But I don't ask them why they haven't done it yet.
Actually, in the conversation we had before this conversation, you mentioned that this isn't your day job. Nope. And I think that's a really important point, actually. It doesn't have to be part of your day job. It should be something that ethically, morally, you want to support. What would your message be to people?
I mean, I think if people are sitting out there with a purchasing decision, even if they're not, they should actually care about this. There might be arguments. Oh, we got all the focus on what we pollute with using black fuel, which oil based, or we're focused in on going on a different kind of fuel on our ships. We're reducing a lot more, and I get that argument. But this is such an easy thing to do in your procurement job, because it is taking responsibility internally, whether you are working for any owner, manager, caterer out there. You can go and have a conversation over lunch with your colleagues and say, guys, I've seen this initiative. We can cut all the bottles from our fleet. We can save money in the progress. We can save the waste in the progress. We can save actually a lot of money per ship. We're talking, depending on how you look at it, but we're talking anywhere from $7,000 to $9,000 per ship saved annually. And then you just done something fantastic. You're saving costs, which for some might even be their job, but you're doing good on the environmental side. You're supporting MARPOL Annex 5. You're doing this. You're checking simply every little box, but it starts with having a conversation. And I couldn't tell you how many conversations I've had to have with companies where I've told them about the project, and then somebody else is coming and somebody else coming. A lot of these companies haven't even reacted on it yet. And for me, it bothers me that we so carelessly don't even just do this and push it through. I mean, with my company, it was the same conversation. Would we want to do it? I had one conversation and we were on board. They said it checks all our boxes. So, you know, it's caring. This is what this comes down to. And it's also one of, and I don't want to tie my own business into it, but it's one of the cornerstones in what we do. It's care. And this comes down to care for even for your families. I mean, we got to live in this junk in the future. We got to have to do something with all the waste we create. And the little things we can just do, getting rid of what we're today producing would be good. So this is just a small thing, but it's so easy to do, and it shouldn't be taking the view away from something else you're doing. You can just basically click a button. I mean, I had one procurement director, he said, we're just going to cut out our supply chain. So any purchaser that was placing orders from ships, they just don't deliver the water on board. They will put the system on board, so you couldn't order water unless you really need it, but then they would let you know. So there are ways to get around this, and it's not that difficult to do the right thing here.
It's care and collaboration, which is something I know that you've mentioned as well. And I guess that can come down to the crew as well. The crew can stand up and say, as well, how they want to receive their water and what that means to them. So it's the voice of many, isn't it, rather than a few.
It is, and I also must say, we are people from different places in the world, and while I'm used to drinking out of a faucet where I live, there might be others who can't drink the water coming out of a faucet because it's probably seen people get really, really sick, because there's a need for clean water on this planet. And it was one of the challenges we've had, and as again on our directory, there's a lot of information on how to overcome this, because it is having a conversation with the crew. I mean, we've done blind water tasting on board ships. You got officers coming down on deck, taking water in a bottle and a glass and just drinking it to show the crew this is safe to drink. It's better than what you get in a bottle. I don't think anyone would say that, but it indirectly it could be seen as that. So, but again, you got to go the extra mile, and you got to do good. And what we also seen, some of the feedback we get from owners and managers out there, is the crew is actually embracing it, because some of them are coming from regions where there's piles of plastic, maybe just in the outside of the cities or laying in the streets. But from where they come from, they have to get in a container of water, because there's no supply chain of clean water coming out of a faucet. It doesn't exist. And that was actually one of my dreams in the beginning, not to go away from what we're talking about. We are non-for-profit. We don't make money on this at all. We don't get money on or kickbacks from anyone on our directory. It's been one of the things I wanted. So we're self-financed. One of the things I wanted to at one point was maybe some of these systems we put on ships, could we put them out in communities, in areas where people can't get clean water, where you could almost bring the water in from the ocean and then clean it on shore and do that. But you'd have to repair it, you'd have to maintain it like you do on ships, and maybe we don't have the right people. So maybe it's wishful thinking, but I thought it was a good thought. But then you would have to get some income to do these projects. But yeah, it was not to degrade from our conversation, but it was in my mind early on.
If somebody is listening to this, and we hope they are, what should they do if they want to have a further conversation? Do they reach out to you? How do they actually initiate, and how do they do that?
I mean, if they go onto our website, now, if I'm allowed to, I'll say this: www.impasave.org. On that site, you would see all the pledges. And if a owner, manager, caterer, and I'm just mentioning these three industries, are interested in this, I'm pretty sure if they go in the directory, they'll find companies where they know somebody working there who's pledged to this, where they can go. Of course, they can contact us directly from the website, but all the information is there, and it's just a matter of pledging. And what we've said is, we have companies that didn't want to pledge because they weren't ready. And I'm like, get that. And somebody wanted to test the systems on board before they would pledge, just to make sure that this would work. The best thing to do is decide to change. Whether you do it today or you do it in 2 weeks or 2 months or next year, but just have a plan to make the change. And it doesn't take much to do the right thing here, and it's a smart thing to do as well. I'd even argue, and I'm going to step on a limb here, not doing this is not smart, to be honest. It really isn't. I'd rather have a conversation with somebody who could convince me not to do this. That would be an interesting conversation, because maybe there's somebody who has a good argument, but then I'd actually consider it my job to explain that person why this is a good idea. This doesn't take convincing, really. I mean, if you want to save waste, which is again MARPOL NX5 part of that, if you want to cut down cost, if you want to do something with your emissions footprint, now we're measuring scope 3, so you can take your scope 3 emissions and get rid of a lot of that just on the bottles. I mean, a lot of people don't know this, but to make a plastic bottle, you need oil and a lot of water and a lot of electricity to produce it. You need to transport the water, which is heavy. I mean, a pallet of water is a ton of water you got to lift on board. So there's so many things, many arguments not to continue with this and just ban it from your supply chain.
I'm going to move on in a slightly different direction around another of IMPA SAVE's initiatives, which is the IMPA Maritime Environmental Footprint IMEF initiative. Can you tell us more about that and how, again, our listeners can be involved?
So this initiative came out of a conference last week in Germany, in Hamburg. And it kind of came in as a question from the audience. And up in my head, immediately transformed and translate into something else. I was on this right away. I started talking again to my IMPA SAVE group and asking these owners that are part of it what they thought. An interesting part about IMEF is a little bit going back to IMPA SAVE. I mean, when we started IMPA SAVE with the initiative, we didn't have the data. We had no data. We only had reasoning, and it made really good sense to do that. So I was challenged by a Copenhagen company who said, are you even sure this is good for the environment? And I said, I'm convinced. And then he actually challenged me. I said to him, you know what? You do the data on this. Actually, compare carton with plastic bottled water, those two, and then add the machine and see what can be done. So we had a conference in London, and I think that's 2 years back, where the numbers were presented, and I was blown away when I saw it. And this is when I learned, to a surprise, how close carton packed water and plastic packed water was. And whether it's 5-10% different, that's it on the emissions. But the unit that you could purchase, and he's just taken one of the units, there might be a different environmental footprint than the other units for the purifiers you put on board. But when you get past the 356 PET half-liter bottles, you actually equal the emission footprint of producing the machine that's going to produce the water. Now think about a low number of 12,000 plastic bottles on board, and you go past the 356th bottle. After that, your emissions are just going to go up. So on a scope 3 emission, you can do it. So why I mention this is take that back to IMPA SAVE. We have no idea of what we are buying today. We have no idea of the environmental footprint. So IMEF was born out of, we cannot just have owners, managers, caterers asking ship chandlers, suppliers all over the world for a number of data points where they want a price of a product, they want the quality of the product, and now they want the environmental footprint of the product, the scope 3 emission. And I immediately saw this is going to be a huge challenge, because and this is not to confuse our listeners, but today you would have two owners saying this is A product is a quality product, this B product is a quality product. But they might be thinking differently on this particular product. They might actually think it's a quality and non-quality. So this is an opinion that they have, and rightfully so. But we need to measure this. We need to measure the emissions equally. So one of the things we've done with IMEF was we brought some like-minded people together. We've had a lot of conversations. We've brought in industry leaders in the management and owners. We brought in platforms. We brought in ERP systems. We brought in experts on this, on where to begin. And there is a common thinking that we need to ask the suppliers the same questions when we want data points. And we started with what we call the product carbon footprint, PCF. I mean, it's really, it's just on the product itself with a few data points. And what we're developing is now a one-pager, hopefully, that's going to be sent out on behalf of owners and managers out there to all suppliers around the world to help them understand what we're asking, because this is a challenge. Now, a lot of people think, well, then they got to pay for it. But it's not about who pays for it at this point. It's about getting to know what we're buying. This one-pager should go out in their supply chains and hopefully end up with a manufacturer who then has to understand what this is. And then it goes back into the supply chain and we measure it. And this is going to take a long time. And even though we start with partially data points and maybe we're going to add more, we can't start by making a huge project and start with everything. So we're starting small, but however, we're starting. So we are inviting companies to be part of this. So we got some very big organizations involved. We got our sister organization, ESA, who this week decided to join. We got a company, an organization called C Europe. They got 20,000 members to support. So we are getting more and more organizations representing their members on board with this. So IMEF is a collaborative group together that's going to find solution that I hope the rest of the world will onboard, as much as I hope they're also onboard IMPA SAVE, and I'm only at 7%, not 100. But I want people to engage. I want people to understand that this is something we got to do together. We got to go this distance. And again, there's no one There's no government saying you can't buy bottles. So this is not even government regulated. Neither is IMEF. But what we are very clear about is we cannot have that an industry standard is placed on us in a year or two from now, which we're not ready for. It is better that we start, and hopefully the industry standard will be the IMEF. Whether it has to be changed a little bit, it's a standard you can work on. So we are hoping we can help ourselves meeting future requirements by having IMEF as a working group. So everybody can get engaged. We can bring people into the working group. The idea is we meet every 4 weeks or every month, 12 meetings a year. It's quite big, so we don't ask when people can participate, they can join. We share the information, and then we share it online as well, so everybody's up to date what we're doing. I think this is a really important thing because we have to ask ourselves, what are our environmental footprint? It's coming to stay and it's difficult, but we got to start. We can't ignore it.
Those that want to be involved, do they go to the same website, www.impasave.org?
Yeah, or you can actually Google it for a better word, and you can just go on the IMEF initiative. You'll find us as well, but we are also on the IMPA SAVE part, yes.
I've got two words that I'm taking away from this. One is care and one is collaboration. And that seems to factor into the discussion that we've had. Before we bring this to a close, Mikael, is there anything else that you would like to add for the benefit of our listeners?
If you're out there and you're not part of this, ask yourself why. Because it doesn't cost you anything to be part of this, but it actually costs you not to be a part of this. I always ask myself, if you're not part of this, then what are you doing? Are you going your own way, doing your own thing? If it's good for the environment and you're just doing your own thing, not sharing it with others, what are you doing then? And this is not a competitive advantage, I believe. This is about sharing. And there's this stupid phrase called sharing is caring, but it actually is. It is a matter of sitting down. And I see so many forums where big owners are joined together, both on future fuels and a lot of other things. And this is exactly what this is, but just get yourself involved. And I talk to companies that, we've done this plastic already, but still join, show your flag. Show you're part of this just because it might get others involved that don't know about it. So actually care about your planet, care about this, even a small initiative. It's just care. That's all I'm asking.
Thank you, Mikael. And today I have been talking to Mikael Karlsson on behalf of IMPA SAVE. My name is Emma Howe and I'm Content Director at Seatrade Maritime. And you've been listening to the Seatrade Maritime In Conversation podcast. Thanks again, Mikael.
Thank you for having me.